Hey everyone, Mark Hespman here. I got notes. You know it's a big time video when I pull out the notes. Printed off notes, handwritten notes. And that's because we're talking about one of my absolute favorite people on planet Earth to talk about, Mr. Aaron Rodgers. We're talking about Aaron Rodgers today because as we're about to start this NFL season in 1 week from tonight, we will have Chiefs and Ravens a week from tonight, I truly have been doing some deep dives into some interesting storylines, thinking about what we need to really be watching for, what we need to keep our eyes out for. And the name and the numbers that just keep coming to my head is Aaron Rodgers, and he's chasing history. So let me explain. Aaron Rodgers is statistically so close to becoming top 4, top 3 in the 2 biggest passing categories in NFL history. And Aaron is a guy who, if we know one thing about him, and I don't think we actually know a ton about Aaron. I think he's very aloof. He likes to say outlandish things, but that doesn't mean we actually know a ton about him. Aaron is a guy I think we do know does care about where he places in the pantheon of great quarterbacks. Let's be honest. Is Aaron Rodgers going to win a Super Bowl over the next year or two? That's a 95% chance no, he's not going to win a Super Bowl. I think Aaron Rodgers knows that as well. He's way past his prime. The league is chock full of great young quarterbacks, and he is with historically one of the most poorly run franchises that doesn't exactly have a history of elevating others around him and him himself to get to a Super Bowl run. So, stats are really important for Aaron. Here's, I think, the thing to keep an eye out for, why I think this is definitively the most important year for Aaron Rodgers' legacy. Not necessarily the most important year of his career, but the most important part of his legacy. The guys who I think we can all agree are ahead of Aaron Rodgers in the pecking order for all-time greats. Obviously, Tom. He's not going to catch Tom. 7 Super Bowls, no one's going to catch Tom. Peyton Manning, I think most people, 90% of smart sports fans, head on your shoulders, sports fans like me, understand Peyton Manning is an all-time great. 2 Super Bowls, statistically ahead of Aaron, and just more important to the game overall. I think then you have Joe Montana. That's a given. I think those are 3 that are lockstep. You can start to argue Aaron around 4, but we've done this exercise before. I think Favre is a more impressive quarterback historically than Aaron. Obviously, you then have Breeze, you have Marino, you have Elway, and now you have Patrick Mahomes as well to deal with. So Aaron Rodgers this season is extraordinarily important to his legacy. His legacy could be defined by this season. What did Brett Favre do after leaving the Packers? Well, he had 1 year with the Jets and it was weird. Then he ended up in Minnesota. And we don't think of Brett Favre's career ending the way his career actually ended. Remember how Brett Favre's career actually ended? It ended on a frozen University of Minnesota field outdoors with Corey Wooten sacking him for the Chicago Bears into the AstroTurf and breaking his collarbone, and his career ended. We think of him as, God, he was one bad throw away from ending up in a Super Bowl and taking the Vikings to a Super Bowl in that NFC Championship game against the Saints. That's what we think of Brett Favre in his final end of his career. Peyton Manning going out with the Super Bowl. And when he got to Denver, those first 2 years, 50 touchdowns, 40-something touchdowns, a Super Bowl loss, but getting to the Super Bowl, immediately getting by Brady once he arrived in Denver. We think of at the end now of Tom Brady's career. Leaving to Tampa, Super Bowl, playoffs, incredible runs, great statistics, and even the way it ended in New England, even though it was a little ugly and he had the bad pick because last throw in New England, we still think of it as an overall gigantic success. If Aaron Rodgers were to not play another down of football, how would we think of Aaron Rodgers? I think we'd think of him as around that 8th or 9th best quarterback of all time. Start to argue one of the most top 3 or 4 most just overall talented quarterbacks of all time. Prettiest balls, accurate. But I think we'd also argue not a great teammate, very aloof, and historically kind of underwhelming. Yes, MVPs, but wanting more from Aaron Rodgers. He can change that with now this season with the Jets. And this season is more important than whatever happens next year if he has a next year, because this season will set up the next year. So let's get into these numbers here real quick. If you don't know, Aaron Rodgers right now is 9th all-time in passing yards, 59,055 yards. He's just 3,008 yards ahead of Matt Stafford. He's just ahead of Eli Manning. But Aaron Rodgers is only 5,033 yards away from passing Big Ben at 64,088 yards for 5th all-time. Aaron Rodgers, for him to get to 5,034 yards to pass Big Ben, he would need to play 2 years. And so in order for him to achieve this incredible stat, for him to put his name up there to be behind only Favre, only Manning, only Breeze, only Brady in the most passing yards of all time, getting in front of Big Ben, he'd have to play 2 years. He's not going to throw for 5,034 yards this year. I just don't see that happening. So in order for him to have the second year, to have the chance to do this, he's got to have a good year. He's got to have a successful year. Touchdown passes, same thing. Aaron Rodgers, 475. That is 5th all-time already. But who's he behind? Brett Favre, 508. Now, he needs 33 touchdown passes to pass Brett Favre for 4th all-time. Can he throw 33 touchdown passes in a year? Yes. Is he likely to? He's got Garrett Wilson. And what else? It's Jets offense, I think, is going to be very run dominant with that good offensive line. I think they're going to want to control the clock. They have a great defense. Why? They're not going to be throwing the ball 50 times a game. I think Aaron Rodgers, this year is so important for him to get about 3,500 yards to 4,000 yards and about 27 to 30 touchdowns. If he's able to do that and get the Jets to 9 wins, 10 wins, maybe make the playoffs, maybe just miss the playoffs, then the energy's positive. He gets one more run. They sign a couple free agents. They get Devontae Adams. They do all that. And in 1 year from now, we'll be talking, Aaron Rodgers will pass Brett Favre by the end of week 2 for touchdown passes. And then, yards-wise, he will have a Big Ben in his sight. It would take another 2 years probably of high production, 4,000 yards to get to Brett Favre to be 4th all-time in passing, but he could get the touchdown passer record over Brett, and he could be right behind Brett in passing yards. I think those things are really important to Aaron, and he's not going to get them if this year's a disaster. If this year he only plays 12 games, injuries, pile up, or he misses time, if they just aren't good and he throws for barely 3,000 yards, 22 touchdowns, 12, 13 interceptions. I know that's very unlike Aaron Rodgers when you look at his whole career, but this is an Aaron Rodgers. We have no idea what we're getting. He's coming off of a major injury. And the last time we saw him actually play, it was a really underwhelming Packers season where they lost to the Lions at home with a chance to get to the playoffs on the line. It's been 3 calendar years since he's been an MVP, putting up 4,000 yards, 35 touchdowns. So Aaron Rodgers needs this year. It needs to go well for him, not only to start resurrecting the actual playing career, it ended on a high note, right? Like Brett ended on a high note. Peyton ended on a high note. Tom Brady ended on a high note. Even Phil Rivers ended on a high note, going and changing teams. Joe Montana going to Kansas City, getting into the playoffs, ending on a high note. Really important for Aaron Rodgers to have that as well. Because if he misses the playoffs this year, it's a disaster and he ends up statistically stinking. Who's to say he's a guaranteed starter in the NFL next year? Who's to say a team takes on the drama and the ego that comes with signing Aaron Rodgers when then it'll be 4 years since we've seen him perform at an MVP level? It's a really important year for Aaron Rodgers. This season could absolutely define his legacy and define how we view Aaron Rodgers in the pantheon of all greats. Not because he needs a Super Bowl or anything like that. I'm done with thinking about Aaron Rodgers as a Super Bowl winning quarterback. But statistically, 5,033 yards behind Big Ben for 5th all-time, 3,800 ahead of Stafford. I think that's also important to mention. Stafford's right on his heels. Stafford, we think, is probably going to play at least 2 more years after this year, right? He's renegotiating his deal, had a healthy year last year. And if Stafford has a 4,000-yard passing season, and if Stafford throws for 30 touchdowns, all of a sudden, if Aaron Rodgers has a stinker of a year, in 3 years from now, we could be talking about Aaron Rodgers having the same number of Super Bowls as Matt Stafford, and Matt Stafford statistically maybe having better numbers than Aaron Rodgers. Aaron, the ball's in your court. It's a big year.